Good morning. We'll go ahead and just get started as folks still trickle in. So my name is Asha Sharma. I'm the Managing Director at SID-Washington, and we're delighted to have you here today for our 2017 annual conference, and more specifically for what should be a lively conversation on innovation and development, game changers, obstacles, and incubators. For those of you who are particularly interested in the topic, we're trying something new this year, facilitated breakout sessions immediately following the panel Q&A. So for those of you who would like to participate, after the panel and Q&A have concluded, please look for one of 3 volunteers in the back, 2 in the back corner and 1 in the back center. Maybe we can get the volunteers to wave their hands so you know who to look for. And paired up with them will be a facilitator and scribe who will then lead the exercise for you from there. If you prefer, you're also welcome at the conclusion of Q&A to return to the exhibit halls or resume your networking break before lunch. Back to the panel. Here to lead us in the discussion is Sarah Glass, Acting Director of the Center for Transformational Partnerships as part of the U.S. Global Development Lab at USAID. So I will pass it on to her to lead us. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good morning. Welcome to what, as Asha said, should be a really lively conversation on innovation and development. I'm really looking forward to this discussion because we have 3 great panelists with us today who are just doing really interesting and exciting things in this space. We have Shaylee Adenolfi, Vice President of Account Management and Marketing at BankU, which is a software technology company that focuses on connecting refugees and the world's poorest to the global economy through secure, portable digital identity. We have Anthony Byrne, Director of Team Engagement at Radiant, an organization that describes its mission as providing Earth imagery for impact, which just sounds awesome. And also Ahmad Ashkar, founder and CEO of the Holt Prize Foundation, which has become a major engine in supporting the development of early-stage startups in the impact sector. I also feel like I should tell you that Ahmad is the 2016 Esquire Magazine Entrepreneur of the Year, which is pretty fancy.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And as Asha said, I am Sarah Glass, Acting Director of the Center for Transformational Partnerships in the Global Development Lab at USAID. The Global Development Lab is the U.S. Agency for International Development, is one of the innovation hubs at the U.S. Agency for International Development. And our team focused on partnerships really works at leveraging the power and expertise of the private sector to partner to make a difference in international development. Because I know that we hope to have a really lively discussion, including lots of time for Q&A with all of you, I'm going to jump immediately to our panelists and ask them to introduce themselves with a few more words about what they and their organizations do, and also to answer the first question, which is, please bring us your passion today. Tell us what you're most excited about related to the impact of your work in international development. Turn it first to Shaylee.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shaylee Adenolfi at BankU, and BankU provides economic identities for people, assets, and organizations on the blockchain. And what does that mean? For an individual or a business, it means pulling together their financial transaction history, their trust network, their assets, such as land, their tractors, and even providing a digital locker for important documents such as health records so that they can keep private for themselves and give to others to view to help them leverage access to finance or employment opportunities or further training and education. And the reason why I'm so excited is because if we realize our goal of creating these economic identities for people at the base of the pyramid. There are actually 1.5 billion people globally without a government-recognized identity, which prevents them from accessing formal financial services. 65 million of those are refugees. So this is a huge issue globally, and if we realize our goal of providing these economic identities, we will have formed or begun to create a new asset class. And if the blockchain community realizes the vision of a future distributed economy, we will have created more distributed wealth and more financial inclusion. So that's what I'm excited about.
Okay. Hi, I'm Anthony Byrne, Director for Community Engagement at Radiance.Earth. So Radiant Earth is a new organization funded by the Gates Foundation and Omidyar Network, and it's really focused on two things. One is the global development community, particularly the practitioners. So those who are actually out in the field globally, who work every day with vulnerable communities on all kinds of development-focused work. And our job at Radiant is to really help with all of, capturing all those exciting emerging trends in various technologies and putting them into the hands of practitioners and really seeing impact. And we measure our success or failure by impact. And for me personally, what's really exciting is the fact that we are on this cusp of, a lot of these emerging trends in tech. And we begin with imagery. Our background is a lot of us at Radiant is in imagery, both on the commercial side and nonprofit side, but also capturing mobile, capturing blockchain, capturing the advances in AI and everything else, and really trying to make sense of it, because we have this thing, we have a huge supply of imagery. We have all these exciting, and more coming on board with the advances in drone technology, balloons and kites. But at the same time, we have a question of, in this glut of supply, how do we really capture demand, and how do we really make demand work in a development context with all the challenges that it has? And that's what I'm really passionate about and why I'm at Radiant.
Hey everybody, my name is Ahmed Ashkar. I'm the CEO and founder of the Holt Prize Foundation. I'd like to first start by thanking the organizers. We organize thousands of events every year, so just a round of applause to Sid and the organizing team. Thank you. I love it when people do that for us. So, I'm excited about the $1 trillion shift which is taking place over the next 5 years. You'll see $3 trillion. The next 5 years, you'll see another 3, and we'll eventually make ourselves to about $65 trillion, which is being shifted from the existing generation to the millennial generation. My passion is aligned with that, in that my passion is young people. At Holt Prize, we spend every day of the year figuring out ways to give young people a platform across universities around the world to figure out how they can blend for profit and for good, transforming doctors to entrepreneurs, engineers to entrepreneurs, and people who never before imagined themselves in the entrepreneurial sector. We introduced to them through a prize model program a way to a risk-free opportunity and platform to become an entrepreneur. I personally am involved in setting up these various pipelines for startups around the world. We're doing a startup challenge for His Holiness Pope Francis. It's called the Laudato Si Challenge. That's pretty exciting. That's on climate change. I've also got a side hustle, practice what you preach. It's called Falafel Inc. Some of you might have heard about it. Falafel Inc. is the first quick service food social enterprise. And for every falafel sandwich you buy up in Georgetown, we feed a refugee for a day. So we think that through opening about 100 of these across the country, we can feed 1 million refugees a day. So there is a place for profit, for good, for purpose. And I'm excited to be here with my co-panelists to discuss some of that today.
For profit, for good, for purpose, for falafel.
I had to plug our new venture too.
So I'd like to ask our panelists really what you see as the most groundbreaking new innovations, technologies, approaches to development. There's a lot of attention that has been given to blockchain and drones. Shayla, you spoke a little bit about blockchain. Show of hands in the room, right? How many of you feel like you're still trying to figure out what the heck is blockchain and why does it matter, right? So, Shayla, maybe you can give us a sense of, in layman's terms, what is blockchain and why it matters, and then to our other panelists, share with us what you see as some of the most really impactful new innovations in development and why you think they matter.
Sure. So I'm going to try and sum it up in a few bullet points, okay? Because I think in bullet points sometimes. So blockchain is simply peer-to-peer transactions on a distributed network, secured and verified through consensus. Okay, peer-to-peer transactions on a distributed network, secured and verified through consensus. It is shared control of database, shared control of data, not a database. So whatever you take away, blockchain is not a database. That's the bottom line. And I have to say, I know there's a lot of hype around blockchain, and but I truly, and there are a lot of skeptics as well. Please come talk to me. Let's talk through these things. I'll give you my card if you want to learn more. I'll send you more information. But I truly do think, this is not just a fad. There is now the 7 largest cryptocurrencies have a $75 billion market cap. And it's not going away. And the reason why it came about was it's not a coincidence. It came about after the financial crisis in 2008, where engineers and entrepreneurs said, we can't trust the government, we can't trust the banks, we need a new economic paradigm shift. Let's try this Bitcoin experiment out, and here we are today, and it's growing. So I think there's something there that's bigger than what we've seen in other technologies.
So give us one more sentence or two on specifically how it works as it matters for the development outcomes that this community is trying to achieve.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I have to go back to the identity space, because the key to create, just like you need an identity to have formal financial services within the blockchain world, well, except for on Bitcoin, where you can remain anonymous. On the other distributed ledgers, you do need an identity to be able to transact. So it's not a coincidence that there are now 180 plus identity organizations that have popped up, many over the past 5 months. And this idea of identity and trust of who you are will be something that people use for future business transactions. And the way we see it in the development space is that some of these trust networks and business associations and growth of small enterprises that we've been trying to work on, and I've been working for development contractors before this job for 10 years, so I'm very familiar with aid implementation. Some of these things that we've been trying to do now are possible through this technology, and because you can do peer-to-peer transactions based on trust without a formal financial institution in the middle.
That's really important. And so just to synthesize, I think what I hear you saying is that blockchain has the power to address challenges where there's not a strong, formal, trusted financial sector, as well as there's not a strong, formal, trusted identity solution. And there are probably any number of other challenges that this technology can also help us address. Thanks. I want to turn to Anthony, and you spoke a little bit about drones before. There's been a lot of hype there. Are they worth it? And are they really the technology to watch? How are they going to matter in the work that you're doing? Or are there other technologies we should be watching?
I think that's a great question. I think we've all, the drone hype, drones enjoying their moment in the sun. I think that my view on drones is they are part of the solution. They are an exciting technology. They are certainly not all of the game, and I am certainly excited by a lot of the, new opportunities for imagery and for data. And I think that if there's a transition from blockchain to drones, I think where it's exciting is in two things. First of all, it's really around what it does for development in terms of tackling some of the most difficult infrastructure problems globally. It's really around empowerment and agency and verification and doing it for yourself and entrepreneurship, which can really only happen when things start off as what we might call expensive boy toys, which is, if you think of satellites and where they came from aerial imagery and now drones. It's really the following of Moore's law, where they become so much cheaper, they become so much easier to access. So many different types of users are now using drones and making it ubiquitous. There's a World Bank project in Tanzania that's really exciting around land rights. It's the biggest drone project in Africa. But it's all done by local graduates in Zanzibar, and it's all around land tenure and land records, and the ease in which this has been able to be put together, the kind of cost efficiencies involved, the kind of high resolution results using all kinds of sensors. Sensors themselves have come down, of course, in price. Then it's combined with, microsatellites, nanosatellites themselves, very cheap to launch and easy to use. And so it really becomes a question then of data is easy to get, supply is easy to get. It's how you use it. And I think that's where the challenge is. But I think it's exciting. I think drones have moved from being, seen as something that obviously came out of the military, and then it became something of a luxury item, or was used by governments. To that thing now where I hear stories about drones in humanitarian situations all the time, and it's just happening on the ground, and it's not even requiring any kind of really specialized trainings. And I will say this, what's exciting is there are parts of the world where the regulatory environment for the use of drones is much freer than in North America and in Europe, and that has privacy concerns. But the upside is it allows for experimentation and for usage, which is very low cost, and that, I think, is exciting for all of us.
Data is easy to get, it's how you use it. We're going to come back to that. But first, I want to turn to Ahmad. You spoke about the power and potential of millennials and youth. What are some of the innovations to watch that you see coming from that community?
Sure. So millennials and youth, I think, are the ultimate game changer. If you take anything away from this panel or this probably conference, is that the power of spending and purchasing behavior is moving. It's being transferred as we speak. Nielsen just put out a great report talking about the social innovation premium. We used to talk about innovation premium back in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. What's the market cap of a company or a project based on the amount of innovative technologies and sciences coming up through those companies? The conversation now is social innovation premium. What are your companies, projects, et cetera, doing to have social impact? And the Nielsen report shows us some really amazing data. And it's over the last 20 years, what you've seen is that 7 out of 10 millennials will choose a product or a service, all else being equal, if impact is being identified with. The piece of data that is even more impressive and that's exciting is the premium. 6 out of 10, that's today's number, 60% will actually pay a premium for that product or service. So what that tells us is that as we think of future technologies, future services, future corporations, future human capital that's going to be working on companies or for initiatives, we need to understand the social innovation premium. And we need to understand how having an impact, and this world over here, this conference, I think most people come from the development space, how your role now is more and more critical to the success of the private sector than it's ever been as we see them merge. And as a millennial, I think millennials are the future, and this transfer of capital, there's a finance company called Cornerstone Capital. Has anybody heard of Cornerstone? A couple people. Everyone in this room should know who Cornerstone Capital is, okay? This is the next Goldman Sachs. They raised over $1 billion under management faster than any other asset manager, and their ethos is 100% social and impact, okay? The money that's being managed going forward is money that's controlled by millennials. It's something like $57 trillion of wealth, which is being transferred from the existing generation to millennials. So what will millennials, given that data, do with that money? So Cornerstone Capital is one of the first financial companies in the world to identify this trend and go raise a bunch of money around deploying that capital to these millennial behaviors. So that's my thing.
It's a great thing. I think one of the questions there is how do we keep that idealism as youth age and other pressures come into their lives, so that people are still willing to pay a premium. So maybe let's shift to talking. We've talked about potential, but let's shift to talking about failure. And what are, you've talked about a lot of exciting ideas, but what are the things that are going to keep us from realizing the potential of the power of millennials, of the work that we can do in Earth imagery or through blockchain and identity? What are the things that are going to keep us from succeeding? And Ahmad, let's start with you.
Yeah, for us, and I think for most startups in the space, whether funding, incubating, accelerating, or your actual startup, is risk-free capital. It's a really big challenge right now. Early stage financing is pretty much dry. People say it's widely available. It's not true. The investment community is still very much risk averse. Again, and I think that's where aid plays a critical role. Aid can play a role, and the traditional development dollar can play a role in kind of the seed financing, if you will, of great innovative projects. And I think that risk-free capital at an early stage, as we see the markets kind of shifting to where the old generation is handing off to the new generation, capital is going to be the biggest. And again, early stage, zero stage, pre-idea, no traction, no revenue, capital.
Shaylee, what do you think?
I happen to agree. I think capital is definitely one of the barriers, but also an opportunity for the development community. We've been lucky to get funding from Rockefeller Foundation. We've had some discussions with the Gates Foundation and the World Bank, and that keeps us alive at the seed stage. But we also have a private sector business model for a sustainable solution in developing countries, and that will require all of us together to work on the bigger barriers, such as education in the technology space, having developers specifically within blockchain that understand the code and the protocols, and policies. We love countries that have tiered KYC or risk-based KYC because it allows for financial inclusion, innovation to take shape. So really, we need to all work together on these more inclusive policies, the education piece, and investment.
And Anthony, on the data front, what are your thoughts?
So there are still some very important obstacles to really putting the data to action, and I think actually it's something that's critical and is underestimated. So I've talked up the virtues of it's easier to access data while there's a huge glut of it, and I'd say there's too much of certain types of data, raw data, and not enough of the really powerful, impactful, longitudinal data, demographic data, population data that can make a difference. A lot of that is still siloed. It's captured either in the really high-res commercial imagery, which is fantastic, but is quite rightly as commercial. The commercial operators charge a premium for that, or it's controlled in government hands. And I want to give you an example of both. One of the most important things around data is openness. And the reason why open data, crowdsourced data, is so important is because of the unintended consequences. So I'm sure you've all seen Lion, the film Lion last year, and the unintended consequence of a kid in Australia who had no other means to discover his way home, essentially, and was able to do that using Google Earth in a way that didn't engage the Google Earth team in any way whatsoever. He spent years of it, he did it, he tells a great story afterwards. But it's the thing about the openness versus closed. And I was in India recently, and I'm excited by, when I was with the UN and first started engaging with India, their view is, privacy is so overwhelming, we're really concerned about it. ISRO and the Indian Space Agency's got some fantastic data sets they've built domestically, but we really need to keep it under wraps. We're really concerned about who gets that. And so the Indian commercial sector and the entrepreneurs, and they have such a fantastic developing ICT sector, weren't really accessing those kind of resources to really, lead to the spur on the economic growth and also the development growth in India. That's changing, and I'm excited by the openness, by the fact they've become leaders in the Indian Ocean on disaster relief, the use of population data, and it's opening up. And in doing so, the domestic Indian community, the IT community, really jumped on it, and are using it in lots of profound and interesting ways. And the Indian government's actually, only now realizing just this trend and how important it is. And luckily, Prime Minister Modi is really on board. But if you don't have that openness, you're really missing a trick. And I think it's great to have all that data, but if it's not enriched by having the fullness of what's open out there, and then using those emerging trends with AI, machine learning to get more power, then actually it does reach a ceiling of utility, especially in development. And that's what we at Radiant are trying to capture and open up.
So it's been said that some of the most important innovations that will impact the developing and the developed world in the next 50 years will come from the blank slate communities of developing economies. And my question for you guys is, it feels that there are solutions that are out there as of yet fully undiscovered. What can we do to accelerate the discovery, the testing, the scaling of those solutions? And in particular, what do you see as distinct roles of the private sector and the public sector in that work? Maybe Anthony, start with you.
Well, I would say that yes, the public and the, private elements are absolutely critical. I think, at the end of the day, governments still have the budgets and the mandate for the large set piece in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of launching large satellites, in terms of building broadband access, all of those large rural electrification, all the key things that allow all this other good stuff to happen, and government still at the center of that. But if you don't have the commercial sector really, especially indigenous commercial sector, properly involved in that and really producing a lot of fantastic and innovative products off the back of it, then it really it struggles to be sustainable. And there's that thing about the tipping point in development, and I think India is again a good example of this, where they've reached the tipping point and they're producing a lot of things in concert now with government and the private sector, which produce indigenous capacity, which is development focused, even if they're not wearing a development hat or falls inside a development budget. And you don't need to tell them about the power of AI or machine learning or data lakes and all these exciting things we like to talk about, because they're already doing it. And now they're even rolling out and they're focused on, they do stuff in Afghanistan, for instance, as part of regional cooperation, which captures a lot of that. And who's involved? The Indian government and the Indian private sector. And I think, that's come in the last 5 years, that kind of capacity. And without that working in concert, I don't think either would have been able to really produce what they have, where they're a regional leader and not just a national leader.
Shaylee, you're squarely at the intersection of the private sector in financial services and the public sector in identity management. Speak to kind of your view on this.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think there's some lessons that we can all learn from what India has done with the private sector and public sector cooperating to create foundation for growth and those building blocks like Aadhaar, like the digital locker concept and all these things. And that's key to the higher level success. But giving micro entrepreneurs the basic tools they need, and small businesses the basic tools they need to graduate to the next levels. And I'm saying this because I come from like the school of thought of private sector development and SME access to finance. I truly believe that the growth is with these small businesses, and so government can do more to, like, even things like, we're working with Chemonics on a scope of work to put movable collateral registries on, just experimenting through a pilot, movable collateral registries on the blockchain in a country where, if that were to happen, small businesses could claim that asset. There would be attestations that was their asset, and they could use it to access finance, right? So these small things, the iterative building of these tools can help businesses grow and access more business opportunities in finance.
Iterating is hard, but really important. Ahmad, are prizes and supporting startups the answer to sourcing new innovations? What's your
I mean, obviously. So, look, I think this idea of a risk-free platform is super important. Innovation is hard, and we deal with a lot of national governments and countries in the Middle East and Latin America and Asia that throw millions and millions of dollars at entrepreneurship. But the reality is you just can't create a piggy bank and wave a magic wand and expect entrepreneurs to flourish. There's so many things which go into culture building, which go into risk-free kind of platforms, which go into legal frameworks. And I think here in the U.S., we can really do I want to say a better job of providing more and more guidance to some of the other countries around the world, because we do live in the most entrepreneurial country in the world. More than half of our jobs are created through small business, and I think that innovation lacks internationally. And unfortunately, oftentimes it lacks by purpose. There's parts in the Middle East where the government owns 60, 70, 80% of the private sector. But with the same swoop of the hand, they've dedicated and earmarked $600 million to upwards of $1 billion for entrepreneurship. So the balance of order needs to be repaired, and we can do that by starting, I think, inside, outside.
So I have lots more questions for our panelists, but really I want to hear your questions. So let's turn at this point to Q&A from the audience. And do we have some? So I think there's a microphone there, and we'll bring it to you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you for the panel. My name is Aida Murad. I'm a Jordanian Palestinian entrepreneur, and I'm also from FHI 360. And I have a question for Ahmed. Well, two questions. One, the government in the Middle East for the different countries are changing. For example, Dubai, now the government, you want to go work with them. Typically, you run away from government. So I'd love your thoughts on that and how it plays into entrepreneurs in the MENA region. And then also for the panel, what partnerships are missing? Like who's not talking to each other, and if we are talking to each other, who should talk more? Thank you.
So great question. Middle East specifically, if you want to talk UAE, government plays critical role, obviously, because they have the ability to issue visas. They have the ability to issue business licenses, and they have the ability to basically have policy in place which allows this idea of risk-free capital. The best example in the Middle East where the government has worked with the private sector would be Lebanon, that we know of. Lebanon has put in a new program, Circular 331. They've earmarked $600 million of risk-free capital, which is being deployed through the banks. And the banks are identifying pipeline, and more entrepreneurs are coming full circle because there's an opportunity to get financing. And the banks love lending because the government is guaranteeing, in some cases, 100% of the risk. Now, the relationship between government and entrepreneurship has to be one that's in sync, whether you're talking Middle East or anywhere else. In the United States, you can incorporate a business in no less than 5 minutes, and a couple of Google entries on IRS EIN.gov, and you're good to go. And your state website, 50 states in America all have a state.gov where you can incorporate in a matter of seconds. So it's an important relationship, and it's one that's continuing to evolve in other parts of the world. Let the other panel take the other questions.
I would say what partnerships are missing is I think there's actually a lot of will in the private sector to do investment in frontier markets, I like to say, instead of developing countries. But what's missing is the combination of us, them, and you all. And I know it's hard to pass up that $110 million Afghanistan project for $150,000 Microsoft funding, but development dollars are going to be cut. So start thinking about your business differently, and let's work together to achieve more sustainable private sector-led development in these markets. And you all have a lot of knowledge of these markets. Let's figure out new business models and do it together. It's not going to be the same. I think it's going to look differently.
I would say that as well, a missing aspect here is, in terms of partnerships, is actually the global development community and the largest practitioners with each other. And they're really missing a trick here. I've noticed in my career how much duplication and siloing still occurs between large leaders in various development and environment and climate change related organizations. And it really does come to the sense of understanding use cases and optimizing budgets. And to give you a practical use example, there is a conservation project in Tanzania, which also is looking at illegal logging and illegal mining and what that deforestation does to some of the animal species and the local communities. And they're using WRI, sort of Global Forest Watch, to do that, and they've got some great metadata, and they're wanting to scale it up for conservation. But they also noticed in their data sets that the Gates Foundation were also noticing that malaria outbreaks were occurring in sort of the similar areas, and they had also looked to purchase some extra sort of data capability, GIS capability around that to try to identify that. If you then realize that that's also linked to illegal mining and what that does to waterways and heat sinks when you clear things, and that's also a sort of a smoking gun. If you can create a common sort of data set and a platform for them to realize this as a community and talk to each other, not only is that more powerful for making their dollars go further, it's also more powerful when you then all jointly go to the government or to a multinational like the UN and say, this is impacting across 6 or 7 different development scenarios, and if we can sort of make a common policy position and put that data to action, but also invite private developers to come on board in sort of like safe spaces to work with those communities to get more out of it for the sustainability aspect, then in a time when budget cuts are happening to the large sort of government development agencies, that's where the global development community, and for you all out there, to really get a lot more bang for your buck and really capture these trends. And that's partly on all of us, and it's partly on the private community, and it's also partly on the shoulders of those that provide platforms, because platforms are sexy. We love talking about it, but there really needs to be a focus on this community as a whole, and not just going to governments or commercial imagery providers, for instance, and not realizing that there's a lot of common need. And this goes back to my first point about openness amongst each other and openness of data, because that's how you really get more bang for your buck across the board.
Yeah, Anthony, let me build on that. Maybe have a little discussion. The issue that I see in going to the development sector versus the commercial sector. In the commercial sector, the fastest, strongest, hardest working, best price wins every single time. 80-20, right? 80% of all funds go to the 20% top performers. In the development sector, it's not like that. So when my companies need financing, I could get it from the development space, but it's kind of a crapshoot, right? Even though I know my company's best in sector, best in class, best performer, best price, but I could maybe lose. I take that same offering to the private sector, I'm gonna win 100% of the time. And I think that's a major challenge in this space if you want to talk about innovation, scale, the recruitment of human capital, et cetera.
Well noted. Next question.
Hi.
Agreed.
My name's Kristen Rogeman. I'm from DAI, over here. And I have a question around actually advocacy. Shaylee, getting back to your comment around working, with the Microsofts of the world, I think that one of the key points we all need to be focused on is sort of trying to figure out how to collectively work together to provide more advocacy. For example, we all know, anyone that works in ICT4D in the room knows that if WhatsApp just opened up their API, all of our lives would be so much easier. And there is real social benefit for that, but no one's been able to make that happen because there's not a business case and we don't really know how to talk to them. So that's like one part of the question. The other part of the question is, I think getting to the emerging markets, I don't think that emerging markets are blank slates. In my opinion, there's incredibly robust tech ecosystems that are way beyond what we're doing in this country. And how do we make it easier for development to work with those startups, because we crush them with the reporting, with the due diligence. I mean, I can tell you how many times that I've worked with projects where I desperately want to work with a local value-added service provider that is excellent and has incredible connectivity and knows how to work in the country, but we can't because of the due diligence. So instead, we're stuck going with the exponentially more expensive but vetted U.S. contractor. So, like, how do we advocate to really integrate these technological innovations in a way that's efficient and a win-win?
On advocacy, I would say, you know, for those of you in the ICT4D community, like Kristen, continue to advocate for data privacy and open APIs and those things that us in the development, the digital principles that the lab put together with FHI 360, who doesn't get recognized for that, but they did. They worked on it. So I would like to, like, I think these conversations need to continue to happen with the private sector in country. I agree. I mean, it would be a lot easier if WhatsApp, the likes of WhatsApp, opened up their systems and we could build on top of that. So continue to push and advocate through associations in country, through the local networks as well as the international ones. Like the WEF provides a good working group, but then also at the local levels, you have your champions and influencers. And then I don't have a good answer for the crushing people with reporting, because it's sort of, it goes back to aid reform and this like friction between needing the transparency to advocate for more money and then like having the flexibility to implement user-centered local solutions, right? And there's this balance that we have to figure out. So I say continue with the aid reform and the good conversations that have been happening about this friction and balance.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though, isn't it? The advocacy goes back to the sense of stronger links with all the players. And I mean, if you're WhatsApp, I mean, obviously you're a business, right? If you want to open up your APIs, then you've got to have a strong business sense to do that. Communities, they can get their act together, particularly with their governments, and can go there and say, we can give you a compelling reason, and that reason would be ultimately, yes, you're doing social good and social impact, but you're going to be opening up markets. You're going to be, people will be using WhatsApp in ways which people haven't even thought of. You're going to be at the forefront of emerging markets and and emerging consumers that are moving into the digital world. That's a much more, if you can make that case, that's a lot more compelling than the traditional argument of you should do this because it's good. You need to say it's good and it's also good for you. And frankly, at Radiant, we have those discussions with the big commercial imagery providers, and instead of going to them and saying, we assume that because it's so expensive, you're the bad guys. It's a case of let's work together. Let's build a community that might demand your products and get what you need, and you get the market access, and we get the data. But you've got to come in with some position of really understanding their needs as well, rather than just demanding that they just be good actors.
I'll take a moderator's privilege here and jump in and say that I think both on the question of asking private sector companies to change their business model and open up information, as well as on this question of within development aid, how do we sort of reduce the crushing reporting? It really becomes a question of getting really aligned up front on what is success. And what are we trying to achieve, and making sure that across partners, if it is with WhatsApp or other private sector partners, that we have found an aligned definition and set of objectives around what's success, so that we can be laser focused on that, just like the private sector is laser focused on revenue and profits. And that work of getting aligned on specifically what is success and are we all headed towards the same goal at the end of the day is hard, and it's hard, I think, among our many different types of organizations to create the space and do the work up front to get there. Right. We have another question.
Thanks. I'm Phil Reynolds. I'm retired from the UN Development Program, and I was really, really encouraged by your comments about the idealism of millennials, the millennials, the interest in social affairs. How can we tap that idealism to support international development?
Great. I'll start. It's a great question. Thank you for your work at UNDP. The key is to understand the millennial. And I think that's first, right? And there's some laughing. And people like to, in the development space and private sector, like to call millennials a lot of different things: lazy, privileged, hungry without cause, right? But what we fail to understand is, and we think at Holt Prize, we've cracked. We get 50,000 applicants every year made up of millennials. We think we've cracked the code, and we think it's made up of three things. You give them an opportunity to pursue purpose, most importantly. Second, community of like-minded thinkers. And third, which we always miss in the development sector, is economic opportunity. They want to make money, but they also want to do good, right? And that's the part that's missing. And if I'm wrong, somebody millennial put their hand up and stop me, right? But it's the combination. And in fact, it's that idealism that leads to extremism and the groups like ISIS and others. And I don't want to shift the conversation too much, but this force works for good and for evil, right? Purpose, community, and economic opportunity. And first things first is tapping into those three kind of notions of millennials. And I promise you, if you provide them a platform or an opportunity or a business or a corporate exec job or a nonprofit job that gives them all those three things, that they'll perform.
I'll give an example of a millennial in a developing country, and I would say, or a frontier market. Give them an economic identity. Give them a way to package the training that they receive from TechnoServe or DAI or Commonics. Give them a way to package or the MFI loan that they received. Right now, they are sitting in the databases of all these organizations. Give them this identity where they can put that all together and use it for increased levels of education or business opportunities or finance. That's where I think the magic is give them that autonomy and ability to leverage what they've done for the future.
I'd agree with all of that, and I'd switch a little bit and talk about millennials and just talk about the importance of culture and cultural opportunities. It's one of the great things about ICT is, and some of these things is how democratizing it can be if you really focus on the right things. And I just want to switch a little bit to say that one of the things I find most exciting is visiting certain parts of the world in which I see a lot of young women quietly part of an ICT revolution in which either the governments are agnostic or even in some cases not even supportive of all, really, of promoting STEM and young women in STEM and getting them involved, and yet they find a way. And the way they do that is if you democratize data, if you make it cheaper, and if you provide them with access one way or another, that's all you need to do in many ways. I'm surprised at how much, it should be reminded of how much energy there are amongst millennials, amongst young people, that if you kind of give it to them and get out of the way, what they can do and what they can produce. And when they're at that point, when they reach that hard bit that's always hard with, innovating anything or being entrepreneurial about anything, and they need to scale up, that's when you come back in by giving them pathways to do that. And that's when Radio, again, we're involved in terms of providing that kind of imagery and then access to crowdsourcing and everything we take for granted in the United States. But I'm excited by that cultural revolution and how in some ways acquired it is. Because these are not things where necessarily women are being championed, for instance, young women are being championed to do it, but they're doing it anyway. And particularly, say, advances in social media and ICT have been led by women in some of the countries I've visited, and they've turned that into really successful businesses. And they didn't need any real active development budget except for supporting them when they really needed to scale. And I think things like that is what excites me the most about millennials.
We have another question.
Hi, my name is Jackie Aldrete. I'm with AFSI Foundation. And Shayla, you mentioned refugees at the beginning. And I just wanted to just bring that up in the interest maybe of also having some specific examples. So thinking about the refugee crisis, global migration, I wanted to ask how some of these game-changing technologies are either responding to or maybe even thriving in this kind of crisis context. Thank you.
Sure. So actually, this is the refugee crisis is an issue that's near and dear to the BankU model, because one of our co-founders is a Somali refugee himself. He's been in the US for 20 years now, successful businessman, but we actually have work in the camps in Jordan and Kenya now. And I'll tell you that right now there are projects happening. There are a lot of duplicative efforts that are happening in these camps. And kids are getting vaccinated 3 times for the same thing. Give them one place to store this information that they own and control, that they can go to the next health provider and say, hey, I already received this immunization from IRC, ARC, give me something else. You know, I mean, these are the kind of things, it's once that project ends, what is this refugee left with? When they go from, you know, Dadaab to Berlin, they're reset. Give them something that they can take with them and build on, and that's what we're trying to do with this identity. And we're working. We need to work with all the organizations to sort of be interoperable at the user level. So, come join us.
This gets to this question of models for data use. And so, Anthony, I want to ask you, you know, you're very much part of this data ecosystem. It's one piece of the data ecosystem that includes so many other pieces. What do we need to do? What are your thoughts on making sure that we are setting up data in a way that it can be maintained and used?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think the most important thing is to realize that in fact the data revolution is now so broad that no one can really capture it fully. You can only be a part of this. I mean, our focus has been imagery, but we're already working very closely with partners on capturing mobile and blockchain, and platform to platform machine learning and AI and all of these, and part of the data models that you have is allowing the practitioners to use it themselves and to make it as easy to access and as powerful as we can. If you, the former question about the refugees is a good example. We have agreements with UNISAT and with the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center to track what happens when you have rapid displacement and you leave your home very, very quickly. And then it gets caught up in conflict, or whether it's a natural disaster and you come back and then suddenly go, this isn't your land anymore. And if you don't have if you've only got paper versions of any records you have, and sometimes you don't even have that, and they were washed away or they disappeared, one of the ways you can track that is through imagery, longitudinal imagery data sets linked to sensors, linked to mobile phones, etc. And we can be part of that solution. But only part of it, because we have to link up to all the other partners, again, government and local community, and then you have the ground truthing and the iteration. And I would just say that we're talking very much about ICT, which is what we love, but the ground truthing and some of the traditional methods still, and cultural methods of verifying who owned what, when, and why, that's the challenge, to make that sort of conceptual data go combined with hard data. So you mentioned the fintech and the digital lockers. Imagery can be really, really powerful, but only if it's allied to all of those other things. By itself, a pretty picture is meaningless. And I can't say this enough. Everyone in the development sector seems to love like really high-res stuff, and it can be important. But some of the most important data out there is actually longitudinal data sets going back to the 1980s. And we're working with some of the commercial providers of that to say that's a stranded asset. You're not using that for business purposes at the moment, but we can help you do that, because we know lots of communities that would find that really, really powerful in what they're doing. But we've got to make it accessible and affordable for you as well. And that's what we're focused on, and bringing those other communities like blockchain is one way to do that.
It's easy to keep this at a theoretical level, but I think also really important to take it to a tangible story level. So maybe can you share an example, Anthony, of where you were able to bring data where it was used in a really meaningful way that we should see replicated in a lot of other scenarios?
Yeah, I can think of many. It's a classic one, but I mean, Radiant's only been in existence since really, August last year. So in terms of us ourselves, but I can mention one where it's becoming really important, which is in Mozambique. They have a lot of land property issues around agribusiness. And agribusiness is good for business, and it has been a large provider of jobs in in countries like Mozambique. But there's a problem because the governments sometimes write permits to say this land, as far as we can tell, isn't really being used or is only ever sporadically used by local communities. If you promise to provide jobs and to try to do some other sustainable features, we'll write you, here you go. And then they get out there to these remote areas and find out actually this land is being used in all kinds of ways. By all kinds of cultural groups, and there's all kinds of unintended consequences with that, and it's led to a lot of problems. What we found impactful, going back to the thing, is longitudinal imagery, Landsat imagery, Sentinel imagery, that actually does prove one way or another who was actually using that land, when do they use it, how do they use it, what are some of the impacts, and that allows for some negotiable settlements between the agribusiness providers and the local communities, in which there really wouldn't have been any other way to have proved that, given that a lot of the tradition of who owns what is not digitized and is very sporadic in terms of the cadastres and the land records. So that's where I think it has made impact, and we hope to do more of that kind of thing.
Sarah, let me chime in a little bit. I think it's important to understand the purpose of data, right? You don't just go collect data and do a great report for the sake of it, right? Data serves one purpose: to cure for inefficiencies, right? To make things more lean. And I think that's a big problem. Again, I don't want to point out the problems in the development sector, but you don't go create you don't create a stack of data and see if you can go sell it. You go do some investigations, right? Everybody here is great at doing due diligence, and you figure out where there's gaps in the market. We have a startup called NanoHealth, which said, the cold supply chain of vaccines are showing upwards of 50% waste because vaccines go into markets where, again, I'm not pointing to USAID, right? I'm just in general, right? And they say, we want to vaccinate X community, so they go overload, right? And they put maybe in some cases 2 to 3 times more vaccine on the cold supply chain. And guess what happens? You can't get any of that back. So that was one of the inefficiencies that our startup came through the whole prize, NanoHealth, identified. And they said, you know what? We're going to go against all medical oaths and codes, and we're going to actually go screen people living in urban slums in India to see who's sick and where, even though we have no treatment, right? And if you come from the medical field, you're not supposed to screen unless you can provide a solution on treatment. So they went ahead and created heat maps of where the diseases were most highest concentrated, what markets were infected, what weren't, et cetera. And now they're licensing that data back to national organizations, both in India as well as international aid organizations, to see where to deploy that supply chain of vaccines and other medications. Guess how they make money? They make money on the delta of savings. So they go to the World Health Organization or others and say, if you use our data, you will save 25%. You take 12.5% of that for savings, we'll take 12.5% of that as revenue. And that's how, again, a tangible story of how we're using data.
I think this is where it is really important to start thinking in development about the business models for development, where we're investing in data, what is the value of that data, and how are we going to use it? How is it driving efficiencies or effectiveness? If we're going to talk about innovation and development, we have to talk about bringing new partners to the table. We have to talk about partnering with the private sector, and we have to talk about doing business differently as standard development agencies, as USAID, and as the rest of the traditional development sector. I still have more questions, but I want to hear your questions. So if you've got questions, raise your hands high, please. In the back and up front here.
Hi, I'm Lisa Cole with Eurasia Foundation. Can you talk about the role that blockchain might play in anti-corruption initiatives and e-governance specifically?
Sure. So within anti-corruption, I can give an example that we've been thinking about. It's obviously creating more transparent procurement systems, for example, at a lower cost than what we see with our traditional technologies. And also allowing people to participate in governance through giving them an identity. one very easy use case is conditional cash transfers. And I know USAID has worked on, through the Better Than Cash Alliance, doing more digitization of government G2P payments, right? And India has made significant advances in this through Aadhaar, cutting corruptions by just knowing who they're giving the money to, because there's so much leaked in the subsidies that get passed down. So conditional, unconditional cash transfers, give people an identity, give the people who are transporting the funding an identity, and have the entire supply chain of money from government to person or small businesses be transparent, right? So it's that end-to-end transparency of government services to people that I think could be very useful. And even like staff, I mean, ghost workers. Give them all an identity. There were, I remember there was a USAID project in Liberia that uncovered, I want to say like 3,000 or more education staff ghost workers, right? Like teachers that were getting paid in dual accounts and things like that. So yeah, open it up, make it transparent.
In the back corner.
Thank you. Hi, Kira Kaczynski from Deloitte. I wanted to go back to the big data discussion, as well as sort of the challenges in getting the private sector to share data. So just a comment and then a question. I don't know if you saw, but recently The Economist did a survey and called data the new oil, basically saying that this is going to be our biggest commodity. It's going to replace oil as one of the largest, most valuable commodities that we have on Earth. So, but one of the challenges that they spoke of is that we don't actually have a price for data. And this is a big problem for the private sector. So in a sense, a couple things with that. There's one, there's no price for the data that you actually own as, for example, a business or a government. So for example, from the private sector view, you could say they don't even know how to donate data because they can't get a tax deduction because you have no price for that data. But then also individuals don't understand the value of their data, and we have not put a price on that. So all these folks that we're getting data from as we do this development work around the world, they could actually put value on their data and decide whether or not they want to share it or what they want to share it for. Now, because we're all giving our data away for free when we accept the terms of Facebook or WhatsApp, that term might be passed. We might not be able to go back to that. So anyway, I'm interested on your thoughts and comments on this. I think this is a big transformation. If we think of data in this new way, what will that mean for development and how you have to interact with the private sector?
I expect all three of our panelists will have thoughts on this.
Yes. So I say give people privacy and ownership over their own data, which we do not have in the United States, which is very sad. I mean, our data's sold. We have clones of us now on the cloud. But give people back the privacy and ownership over that data, and the value will come flourishing out. And and this is now possible through the blockchain because you can now own your own data. You're not, through a centralized database, that company owns your data, right? So there's a huge mindset shift that we're gonna be making in this. So I think the value will be created from people having ownership of their own data.
Yeah, I certainly agree. There's a starting point around privacy and ownership. I always find this thing of like, what is the value of data? It's fairly nebulous and reminds me of some of the discussions around trying to put a price on carbon, of which the easiest thing to do is just to tax it, and then we'll find out. But that was always the thing with cap and trade. Of course, was you have a problem when you can't quite stick your thumb up in the air and decide that's the price. And same with data. So then, the view oddly if you can bound the privacy aspect and take control back of your own data, but then choose to open up that data and pull everyone, other people's data voluntarily, then that's where the value is. So that instead of just giving it away, you own it and pull it and use it and build things of value from it. then you're in a much better a place to people to purchase it, or to say, okay, we actually want that data. We will give you something that you want. So, if you want some kind of powerful tool or some other type of enablement, well, you've now put a price on your own data, your own value, and we'll decide to pay for it. And if we do, we will give you that. But that's not something that's very easy to do. And I have to admit, I think blockchain is one way to do it, but I remain skeptical of articles like The Economist because of the sense of it's everything and nothing, right? Data is everything and nothing. It's really around context, and there's so much work to be done to take it back and put it to use. Development's only one challenge, right? So I'm just going to caution around that, because I think that people love talking about the value of things without really understanding that the bounding is what's really difficult. And I think I read that Economist article didn't really talk about how you bound it. So I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
First of all, nothing is free, okay?
Right.
So you don't pay money to use Facebook or WhatsApp, right? You're trading your data to access those great platforms, and if they actually asked you to pay, right, you would say, no, take my data instead. So there's the balance of markets there. And I think something to remember is any private sector company will give you anything if there's a value proposition, right? So you can either pay for the data, you can get WhatsApp more customers, right? There has to be a business transaction. I think that's some of the lines in the sand between private sector and development. But I also like you guys to think about the negative ramifications of a pay-to-play model. You can go to pretty much any country in Africa and access WhatsApp from a dumb phone that does not have internet access. You don't even pay to access the internet, which allows you to access WhatsApp and Facebook, thanks to Mark Zuckerberg, right? In remote parts of Africa, which allow mothers to communicate with each other and give each other healthcare and parenting groups that work collectively. So there's huge negative ramifications to moving with this pay-to-play model for data, which will have huge consequences for the developing world. And I think that's what you were going, and that's what the Economist article didn't mention. But there's an entire oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. That is something that needs to be considered as well. But all good points.
I think we probably have time for one more question. Anybody right here in the front?
Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm from Chemonics. And I wanted just to circle back to one of the initial questions about enabling millennials and young professionals within the development space. And so I understand, aside from the 3 points about a certain work culture that's provided, what skills do you see that's missing among international development professionals that you see are needed within the coming 5-10 years? Because having worked in the private sector and in social enterprises, it seems like, for example, for BankU, you're looking for software developers and engineers. For startups, looking for people with business acumen can make a pitch, to investors. So it doesn't seem that the traditional education that one would think an international development professional receives, such as critical thinking and general writing skills, or like an MA in conflict resolution or something, is, maybe not suitable for where this industry sector is going in the next 10, 20 years.
It's a great question. Some great reading is Angela Lee Duckworth out of Penn. Did some work on something called grit. That's what we look for when we hire. These are the intangibles that allow you to kind of work harder, work smarter, have that hustle. I think that's important whether you're in international development or in private sector or traditional public sector. For us at Holt Prize, we've seen it. The strongest both employees and entrepreneurs that come through our funnel are those that demonstrate soft skills, and that's what grit is all about, those soft skills.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, and you mentioned them in the question. I mean, the obvious ones, of course, is more computer scientists, more business background, more sort of understanding, particularly of entrepreneurship, which is hard and tough, and there needs to be more thinking about that. But I would also say that I love the concept of STEAM, which is you take STEM and you add arts, and it's this thing about producing more generalists in the development sector who are very comfortable with science and engineering and computer science and technology, but retain what's at the core of a lot of professionals in development still, which is the humanities background, because it's not an either or, and the millennials I love working with are the ones that I kind of call them, like, you're not STEM, you're STEAM, because you also, when you do engineering classes and computer science classes, you were bringing in, you did policy, you did philosophy, you studied history, you understand, how certain countries in this that you want to help have got to where they've got to, it didn't start yesterday. And those sorts of all-rounders in development is what I would like to see, because they're able to switch and point and see opportunities much faster than those that are just purely focused on very strict vocational skills. So please, more all-rounders would be great.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, work hard, don't expect a raise after 5 months. I had to do those expense reports. I had to clean those biodata forms. It sucks, right? Like, the admin work sucks. And you're like, I just got my master's and I have a few years of experience and I'm getting paid this crappy salary in international development. Well, we all had to start there. So welcome to the world of really smart people who want to do big things and change the world, right? I mean, work hard, dream big, distinguish yourself, and success will come. And that's all. I mean, I agree with them too.
I'll double down on that, and also say that innovation in development is going to come from the merging of many different types of expertise and experience. And so bring your passion, right? We need coders and business experts and scientists and agronomists and healthcare professionals, right? So I think that the development sector can benefit from a large number of different kinds of expertise. And also there is no, there's no substitute from doing this work in person. And so it's really, really hard, as someone who sits a lot of my time here in this building in Washington, it's really, really hard to feel connected to international development from within Washington, D.C. And so if you are a young professional looking to get into the international development sector, go live internationally and have that experience working directly with the communities that you want to support. On that note, Asha explained at the beginning that we're going to have an opportunity to continue this conversation in some small focus group discussions. And as we close this panel, I'd like to ask each one of our panelists to just share with you what's one key message that you hope this group takes with them out of this discussion, or a key question that you'd like to see the group continue to discuss as the conversation carries forward. Let's start with Shaylee.
I would say get involved in the discussions around data privacy and advocate for change and a more distributed wealth, more distributed economy, and continue doing the good work and fighting the good fight. I know it's tough in this sort of time of budget cutting, but let's continue to think about new business models to deliver development in a more sustainable way.
I guess my take-home message would be to proactively embrace these technologies. Don't get overwhelmed by all of the different, data sets out there, by all the techie discussion, by the sense this is only for like computer science practitioners. Really focus on the endpoint, which is we just need enough technology to do what we need to do and for who we need to do it for. And if you can focus on results and putting data to action and getting just enough of what you need with the communities that you represent, then you're there from this perspective. Don't get caught up in the game of forever focusing on the coolest toys or the newest things. Think about, obviously, about delivery and impact.
Okay, thanks. From my perspective, so I tell all of our entrepreneurs, get uncomfortable. And the only way you'll learn and you'll innovate is if you collect more and more and more dots. And the only way to collect really good dots is to make yourself super uncomfortable. So do something today that you normally wouldn't do. One good way to kind of a metric that you guys can put on being uncomfortable is how many new Facebook friend requests you can get from somebody who has zero mutual connections with you. That's obviously not like a stalker or whatever, right? But it's a really good test. So if you never receive a Facebook request from somebody where you guys have zero mutual friends, then you're not being uncomfortable enough, because that will allow you to continuously grow your network and meet different kinds of people. Like if you don't like Chinese food, go to a Chinese restaurant, right? If certain environments make you uncomfortable, go there. And I think you'll be amazed at what the possibilities could be.
That sounds like a good note to end on. So hopefully we can all continue to get uncomfortable over the course of the rest of today's conference. I want to thank our panelists, as well as all of you for joining us, and the organizers at SID for putting on today's conference. And then I want to ask our facilitators for our breakout discussions to raise their hands. So we've got one there, one here, and I think what we're going to ask folks to do is congregate in the corners of the room if you are interested in joining a follow-on discussion. So thanks everyone for joining us today.